All right, today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most powerful and, let's be honest, most invisible forces in all of finance. We're talking about U.S. hedge funds and just how massive their global influence really is. Let's get right into it.
So let me ask you a question. Who actually pulls the levers of the global economy? Your first thought might be presidents or maybe central bank governors. But the real answer? Well, it's often a lot more surprising than that. Because more often than you would probably guess, it's a very small, very concentrated group of hedge funds. Think of them as these invisible hands that can literally push entire currencies up or down, or tilt the gigantic markets for government bonds. So how in the world did we get here? Well, it didn't happen overnight. We're talking about decades of financial innovation that turned U.S. hedge funds into these super concentrated hubs of capital, talent, and of course, technology. And all of that together gives them the power to make these huge moves that just reverberate across the entire globe. But to really get a grip on their power, we have to look at how they operate. We need to peek inside their playbook, so let's break down the actual strategies they use to turn all that capital into real-world market influence. Okay, so this basically boils their complex world down into 4 key moves. First up, you've got global macro. This is all about making massive bets on big economic trends. Think interest rates, inflation, that kind of thing. Then there's something called relative value arbitrage. It sounds complicated, but it's really just about exploiting tiny, almost microscopic price differences between similar assets. Next, we have the quants and high-frequency trading. This is where speed is everything, using incredible algorithms to make millions of trades, often for tiny profits that add up. And finally, you have event-driven strategies. This is where funds make very targeted bets on big corporate moments, like a huge merger or an activist campaign. Now, these strategies aren't just ideas in a textbook, right? They are wielded by absolute titans of the industry. So let's look at 2 firms that really personify this power: Bridgewater and Citadel. So on one side, you have Bridgewater, who we can call the macro titan. Their influence comes from shaping sentiment. When Bridgewater makes a big move based on some global trend, you better believe the rest of the market is watching and usually following suit. And on the other side, you've got Citadel, the market maker. Their power is way more structural. Through their sheer massive volume of trading, they directly affect market liquidity. I mean, the very plumbing of the financial system. And this gets to an absolutely crucial point, especially about firms like Citadel. They don't just play the game. In many ways, they help write the rules. They're actively talking with regulators about things like 24-hour trading. So they're literally shaping the infrastructure of the markets that they dominate.
So here's the key takeaway. The actions of these few firms don't just stay in New York or Chicago. Oh no, they create these very real, very tangible ripple effects that are felt all over the world. Just look at this chain reaction. It all starts with one massive trade. That first move starts to shift prices and liquidity. Then other investors see what's happening and they react, which just amplifies the whole thing. And then, all of a sudden, the actual real-world borrowing costs for entire countries and major corporations can completely change. And here are the consequences in plain English. Exchange rates start to wobble. The amount of interest a whole country has to pay on its debt can go up or down. I mean, this is real influence, and it's not being wielded by some political decree, but by the super strategic deployment of capital. And hey, this isn't some old history lesson. In the recent era of, much higher volatility, this influence has become even more critical. Since just 2022, hedge funds have become the dominant force in Europe's massive government bond market. Their activity is now structurally important to how things work. So naturally, this brings us to the big question of risk. I mean, when you have so much power concentrated in so few hands, you have to ask, what are the potential downsides for the global financial system? And you can bet that regulators and central banks are paying very close attention. Their concerns are pretty clear. You've got this high concentration of risk in just a handful of funds. They use an enormous amount of leverage, which magnifies every single move. And then there's the danger of so-called crowded trades. That's when everyone tries to rush for the exit at the exact same time, which can cause a really violent market shock. Which brings us to our final and maybe most critical question. With this much influence resting in the hands of a very small number of private firms, Is this concentration of power ultimately a problem for the rest of us?
When you boil it all down, the key takeaway is really this. In our deeply hyper-connected global market, the private bets and strategies of a few incredibly powerful firms can have very real, very public consequences for every single one of us. The invisible hands of the market, well, they're more concentrated and more powerful than ever before.